Hi, I'm Kate. Welcome to Blooms in the Yard. Today I'm going to talk about bulbs that we plant in the fall and varieties that I would suggest for my area, which is Kansas City, Zone 6B, and some varieties that I wouldn't suggest. So my friend asked me to make this video. So this is for you, Faye. She said she went to Costco and she just didn't know which ones to buy. And so she asked me to make a video about it. I'm not trying to sell bulbs here, so I can just give it to you straight. And I feel like sometimes when I watch videos, you hear like all the good things and like you don't hear like, this didn't work for me, like don't grow this. And so I feel like I will say that. So the number one bulb that I would suggest planting in the fall is daffodils. They're the most reliable for me. They're a wonderful way to fill your perennial beds with color in the spring before your perennials start to come up. I went through this kind of crazy daffodil stage where I just bought them all. I was really entranced by all the doubles and the fancy stuff like Replete. My experience had been with your traditional like yellow trumpet shaped daffodils. And I just saw that they were really reliable. And so I just kind of assumed that all daffodils would be that way. And that hasn't been my experience. I think some of those fancier, really unique ones, there are some negatives to those. So that's kind of what I'm gonna go into. I quickly found that there's more to a daffodil than just that pretty picture of the bloom, like how long the blooms last, if they tend to flop over quickly, how they deal with the heat when the heat sets in, do they naturalize, and how substantial is all of that green foliage after the blooms have passed. This variety, Gay Tabor, is really beautiful, but it just quickly died out in my garden and it didn't even really bloom that well to begin with. So even though I was really excited about it, it just didn't perform as well as I would have liked. So I have found that sometimes the most beautiful ones are not always the most reliable to come back. Some doubles that I have had luck with tend to be the earlier blooming varieties because the heat can really zap them. With my daffodils in general, and even with my tulips, I would rather they get hit with snow than with hot temperatures. Ice King is one of the first daffodils I tried, and it was just a random purchase at Home Depot. I've now had them under my magnolia for years, and they've done really well there. They are an early blooming variety and they bloom around the same time as the magnolia, which has worked really well. The magnolia tree does have really shallow roots, and they're also kind of known for putting out a chemical that can suppress other plants. So I have had trouble growing other things under my magnolia, but these have done really well. Now, when I first planted these Ice King daffodils, I didn't really know what I was doing. They were one of the first kind of bulbs I had planted. I put them in like two bunches on either side of the magnolia tree, and they just looked really silly, especially as they started to fill in. It just would have looked more natural for them to be a little more spread out and in little clumps. And so eventually I did end up digging some out and spreading them around a little bit. So that Ice King has been a great daffodil that I would highly suggest. The Tahiti do bloom a little bit later. They bloom in mid to late spring, but they do last surprisingly long for having to deal with that heat. I was a little concerned about whether I would like the color of the Tahiti. It's really like a nice pale yellow. I had some yellow cheerfulness in this area and I really did not love them. I did not like the color of yellow on them. I added the Tahiti in with them and I feel like it's made the whole area look better. In general, I would not suggest the yellow cheerfulness. The colors kind of, it just sits wrong with me. Somehow the Tahiti tones the whole area down and like makes it work. The Delna Shah was one that I thought looked really pretty and I was really excited about. It's done okay for me. The Delna Shah has been okay. I would say that the main problem with it is just that the blooms don't last that long. I started with only 5 of them, so I feel like I don't have very many, but maybe it's because I just didn't start with quite enough bulbs. All of these photos are from my own garden, so they're not like photos I found online that are the perfect flower, but these are what they really do look like in my landscape. One daffodil that has just been a total fill for me is the Mount Hood daffodil. It barely even bloomed the first year after I had planted it in the fall. I've given it like 5 years, and I actually ended up digging it up this spring. I was like, if it does not bloom this year, I'm getting rid of it. Another fail was the minnow. Now this one might have been based on where I planted it. I put it on in my west garden in amongst the rocks, and wasn't able to plant it very deep because I was planting it in the rocks, and so that one might have been user error. One of my favorites, unfortunately I don't know the name of because I ordered one thing. I ordered the peach cobbler, and what came was, I mean, I could tell when it came up, I was like, that is not the peach cobbler. And I kept track of which variety I was planting where. I suspect that this beautiful white variety I have is Bridal Crown. Certainly nothing like the peach cobbler. These are a very happy accident, as they've now become one of my absolute favorite daffodils. They're very long lasting, they look really beautiful, and they make everything around them look better. So I do believe that those are the Bridal Crown, and I would highly suggest that variety. I did have some similar ones growing in the backyard that had the small white blooms, but those were definitely different. They bloomed a little bit later, and they had a lot more foliage, and so they really kind of took over the whole bed, and I ended up taking those out even though they had beautiful blooms. So whether or not there's a ton of foliage can really make a difference. The flowers themselves flopped, and then I just had this huge amounts of floppy big green foliage, and so I don't remember the variety on that one. Another kind of disappointment was the pink charm daffodil, and this one was disappointing due to the fact that the blooms are not pink at all. So the center of these are supposed to be pink, and they do change throughout the season, but they kind of go from like yellow to orange, and very rarely do I see any pink. So there's just nothing special about these. The only thing I like is how the Grape Hyacinths and the red peony shoots look in this area with the daffodils all together, but I think I could get that effect with a much prettier daffodil. It does bloom early to mid-spring. I would not plant it again because I just don't love the color. It's probably a good time to mention that daffodil color will change throughout the season. So as the blooms fade, or maybe as the weather changes, you might think that doesn't look like it did on the package, but if you wait a couple weeks, it may look more like it did on the package. Thalia has been a good variety for me, even though it is a little bit later blooming and doesn't last as long, but it's really filled in nicely for me around my bird bath. You can see this is what it looked like probably 1 year in. I've been a little bit my own worst enemy on this one because when I plant annuals and other things around the bird bath, I tend to accidentally dig up the daffodil bulbs. Now, one of my best varieties is just those good old-fashioned yellow trumpet tulips that I've had forever. They're actually here when I moved in, and I've split them and moved them around the garden, and they do bloom early. So they're, other than the Ice King, they are my earliest variety, and they just bloom for a really long time. And I think that part of that may be because it's cooler, and so the heat is really what makes the daffodils kind of finish blooming. So I really think it helps with these yellow trumpets that they bloom early. So I would say that daffodils are your best bet if you are newer to gardening, just starting to try bulbs. They are going to be really reliable. Now that's in my area. I know that some places maybe it doesn't get cold enough in the winter for them to naturalize, but in Kansas City, zone 6B, these are really reliable. One negative to daffodils is just dealing with all of the green foliage after the fact. So these pictures kind of show what it looks like for a while until that dies back or until I cut them down. I have to admit, I usually cut them down before I should. They say you should wait 6 to 8 weeks or until the foliage starts to yellow. So the best place to plant your daffodils would be under and around something that comes up later in the season, like maybe hibiscus, Rose of Sharon, maybe a crepe myrtle. The worst place is going to be too close to an evergreen or too close to a spring blooming bush, because you don't want your daffodil foliage covering up that bush right when it's blooming. So I kind of made that mistake with a spirea, and I have some daffodils planted too close to it. The ones I've planted underneath my magnolia tree are perfect because nothing else really grows underneath there, and they bloom at the same time as the magnolias. Now, I think daffodils planted with peonies is a perfect combination because the red shoots of the peony look great with the yellow and white blossoms, and then the peony, when it opens up and starts to leaf out, will cover all that daffodil foliage, so you don't even need to worry about cutting the daffodil foliage down. The second bulb I want to talk about is tulips, which I would also suggest, but I think that you either have to do a lot of research on what variety you're going to plant, or you need to look at them as annual. If you are new to gardening, tulips might not be the thing to start with. They're going to be a little bit higher maintenance because you do have to plant them every year and you have to get rid of them every year. I would just consider them kind of high maintenance if you're new to gardening. Now, I will say that I've had luck with one tulip naturalizing, and that is the red Impression Tulip. I did quite a bit of research before I purchased this and planted it, and I knew I wanted it to come back around the outside of my potager garden. It's been about 7 years, and I do still have some coming back. And the ones that aren't coming back anymore, a lot of that can be because I'm always digging in that area, so I've definitely dug some up over the years on accident. The first year with those red Impression tulips, you got one single bloom, and it was a large bloom, and then in subsequent years you get more blooms, so where there was one, you now have like a bunch of blooms. Now, I was just at Costco today, and they had a package of red Impression and pink Impression tulips, so they are available for pretty affordable right now. I don't know if that would be everywhere or just Kansas City, but they had a bunch in our Kansas City Costco. Because the red Impression tulips did so well, I was like, ooh, I want pink and purple. So I bought pink and purple Impression. They did not naturalize as well. First of all, the purple ones really didn't even come up that well and bloom for me even the first year. The pink ones did, but didn't naturalize nearly as well as the red ones. So just something to keep in mind. Now, we all love tulips and we all want them to naturalize, and so then you start to hear about the species tulips and you get really excited, and then you grow them, if you're me, and then you're like, those actually don't look very much like tulips. I mean, they're like little tiny little short tulips, but they don't have like the presence or the look of tulips. So yes, they're fun to grow, but to me, they're almost more like a crocus. So if you're hearing about species tulips and getting excited, just know like they don't really have that same traditional look of the tulips that you're used to. They are fun to grow. I had the most luck with Tarda, which is a little yellow and white one. This is the Persian Pearl, which did really well the first year, but unfortunately did not come back. And then here's the Little Beauty, which has come back pretty well for me. They're definitely less impressive than your typical tulip, so just know that going in. Now, if you are okay with replanting tulips every year, then I would definitely suggest the backpacker tulip. I grew this last year and I just thought it was gorgeous, and I mean, like every day I just kept going out and taking more and more pictures of it. It just seemed to get better every day, and it lasted a long time too. I bought it at Costco last year and I've been looking, but I have not been able to find that same one. Now, I did get, this is kind of a similar look, this, the blue spectacle, which is the more purple one. So I did buy this just recently from Costco. I also, last year, grew the Finola tulip. It wasn't the same package, but I grew the Finola, and it was really pretty in this area by my back arbor, by some steps I have. And so I was excited to see like that they had this blue spectacle, which was one I've looked at online before, and the Finola. And today I forgot that I'd already bought the Finola like a couple weeks ago. So when I saw this today, I was like, ooh, it's the Finola. And then I got home and realized, so now I've gotten double, but that's okay because they'll be really pretty and I can plant a bunch of them. And then this also came with Glamour Girl. So I don't know if I'll put the Glamour Girl with the Finola, but I know I'll do those blue spectacle ones, which are more purple, in the front yard, and probably do most of the pink ones in the backyard. A couple other ones I've grown in the past. You know, I said I love that backpacker tulip. The Renowned tulip was gorgeous, really, really nice. I am definitely drawn to the double tulips, and they do not naturalize as well. So that's something I just kind of know going in that I'm just gonna have to replant. Now last spring, when these tulips started coming up in my vegetable garden, I was like, ugh, why did I plant those colors together? They did not look good. It was like bubblegum pink and purple, and I just really didn't like them together. Well, then I went and found the package, and I planted them together because they came together in the package. And as they aged, there was a point where they didn't look as bad, but at first I was like, oh, so I wouldn't plant those two together. If you are local to Kansas City, Grass Pad has a really nice selection of tulips, and they've got all these open boxes, and you can just take as many. You can take 3, you can take 10, and you can choose each variety, and they're all priced individually. And I just kind of liked that to experiment with a couple things last year. Last year I got one called Kansas Proud, and that was kind of a cool one that was purple and white. The best place to plant your tulips would be where you are going to be planting summer annuals later. I'm planting my tulips not really expecting them to come back, other than that one area of red Impression tulips. A great place has been where I plant my zinnias, because when those tulips finish up, then I can put the zinnias out and it just works. I've also found that I can plant my tulips in my vegetable bed if I'm not growing spring crops there. So you can grow your tulips in the spring and then plant your tomatoes and cucumbers in the summer. The third bulb that I would suggest for Kansas City is Allium. They're gonna bloom a little bit later, so they're gonna bloom more in late May to June. I've had a lot of luck with Purple Sensation. And these are also pretty easy to find and really affordable. They're not quite as showy as some of the more expensive ones, but again, easy to find and affordable. And they have come back for me reliably for many years. Similar to the tulips, as time goes on, I'm getting more blooms, and the blooms are smaller. They've done really well growing amongst my strawberries. You want to try to grow them where the foliage is kind of hidden, because the foliage starts to turn brown even before the blooms are done blooming. Last year, I planted 9 Gladiator Allium, and they really added a lot to my garden for me this year. I also really enjoy the Drumstick Allium. They're definitely a different look, really unique, and definitely, in my opinion, worth growing. These have kind of gotten crowded out over the last few years by the iris that are near them, and so I do plan to start fresh in a new area. I like them that much that I'm willing to buy more and start over. Now, I'm only mentioning the fall planted bulbs right now. There are also the summer blooming perennial Allium that you would buy in a pot at a nursery. So those are definitely my top 3. Now I'm going to talk about a few others that I enjoy that I would just say they're a little less showy, a little less special. My Dutch irises are my first thing to bloom in my garden. And that's actually not true anymore, because now I have some hellebores that bloom a little bit earlier. But for many years, the Dutch iris were the first thing, and it's like that was like my sign, like spring is coming, the winter's almost over. And I know a lot of people, crocus are kind of their harbinger of spring, but I haven't had a lot of luck with crocus. I planted them a couple times and they haven't been reliable. And so these Dutch iris, planted them once, 8 years later, they're still coming up. They look similar to a Siberian iris, if you're familiar with those, but they're just a couple of inches tall. I actually think that the Dutch irises are prettier than the crocuses. So for me, I wouldn't suggest crocuses. If you're new to gardening, I don't know why I haven't had luck with them, but if I have luck with something, it goes on the good list, and if I don't have luck with it, it goes on the naughty list. I do really like Grape Hyacinths. They are not as showy. You really want to plant them in mass. Like they're not going, the one little bulb with the one little tiny flower is going to be kind of a dud the first year, but you know, then the second year you'll have 2, and then you'll have 4, and then you have 8, and then you have 16. So, you know, 4 years in or so, they're going to start to look like something. They really look good planted in little bunches. So when I first moved into this house 11 years ago, someone gave me a package of them, and I planted, you know, 1 every 6 inches apart. And so the first year I was like, okay. But, you know, several years in, it was really great. And now I've been able to take those and divide them and put them other spaces in the garden. So now I do really like them. One negative to the Grape Hyacinths is that the foliage comes up in the spring and the fall. So you're not getting the blooms again in the fall, but the foliage just comes up in the fall, and you kind of need to let it grow to nourish that plant for the spring blooms. And so it's just kind of a bummer to have that foliage with no blooms in the fall, but it definitely doesn't stop me from growing them. I think that they're worth growing, super low maintenance and easy, sweet little blooms that really complement other things. These are not showstoppers in and of themselves. Now, you might not think of lilies as fall planted bulbs, but you can actually plant them in the spring or the fall, and it actually will help them a little bit more to plant them in the fall because they can start their root system getting established over the winter. So this would be your Asiatic lilies. There are so many. I've never had trouble with any of them, so I wouldn't even necessarily say, you know, grow this variety or that variety. But I would say you might as well grow the bigger the better. You know, they're just more impressive, bigger blooms. And so I like to get the ones that are like 4 or 5 feet tall. It's also better for the rabbits not eating them. Purple Prince is a big favorite of mine. And I also really like the Martagon Lily Black Beauty. I've also grown Stargazer Lily, and the benefit of that one is super easy to find, super affordable, because you can get it at Walmart or Home Depot or wherever, and that one's performed pretty well for me. For all of these bulbs, it always says on the package how deep to plant them and the spacing and all that, so I'm not going to worry about that, but the general rule is 3 times the depth of like the size of the bulb. So if it's like 2 inches tall, then you would plant it like 6 inches deep. I really love my little auger. I might go grab it. So this has been game changing for me. You just put it in a drill, it's a drill bit, and this is, I believe, a 3-inch, and I just am able to get my holes dug a lot deeper than just with my trowel, and it's way less work with this. Now it does sometimes kind of twist my arm, so you just gotta hold it steady and adjust like the power on your drill so that it's not kind of wrenching your arm. But that has saved me a lot of mess because you're not having to, you're just digging the hole straight down instead of kind of the hole getting wider. And huge time saver. Like when you're planting, I now have 100 tulips, that is huge, makes a big difference. Hyacinths are really pretty, but I just am not gonna plant them anymore. They're really pretty the first year, but one thing I don't like about them is they tend to tip over, and I don't like that look. They're almost too showy for me, which I know sounds silly, but I don't know. I'm just not like a huge fan of them. They don't come back reliably. Like if they do come back, it's a lot less. Like the blooms aren't as full looking. And they don't really multiply, so you just have that one come back that's a little bit sadder each year. And it seems like you get maybe more green each year. And so, if you wanted to plant them as an annual, maybe, but I'm not gonna mess with the hyacinths anymore. Fritillaria is a really fun bulb to grow, but it's not very showy in the landscape. So I feel like it's more for people who you've done everything else and you want to try something unique and different, then Fritillaria would be a fun thing to try. But it hasn't naturalized well for me. It has come back, but it hasn't multiplied, kind of slowly died out. So I just have, I think I started with 25 bulbs and I maybe have 5 or 7 blooms a year. So like I said, it's a special plant, but you wouldn't even, like, I wouldn't be able to see it from my kitchen window. I've kind of got to go out there and really look for it. So it's just not very showy or noticeable in the garden. Now, technically, peonies are not bulbs, but fall is the perfect time to plant peony roots. And I do think that if you want peonies, that planting them from bare root is definitely the way to go. It's definitely a lot more affordable, and I actually think that they do a little bit better. It will take a few years for them to bloom, but once they get going, you'll have them for decades. The variety that I have with the yellow centers actually has more of an abundance of blooms than the bigger double peonies. This one was given to me, so I don't know the variety. My best advice for where to plant peonies is plant them where you're never going to have to move them. They really don't transplant well, although you can start them over by completely dividing them and just planting a root. Well, 5 years ago, I moved one from one place to another. It never really recovered, and just recently I tried to dig it up and found it had never really rooted in after 5 years in the new spot. So definitely plant them where you want them to be forever, and definitely plant them in full sun with good air circulation because they are susceptible to powdery mildew. Okay, so to recap, my top picks are daffodils and allium, and tulips if you don't mind replanting every year and considering them to be more of an annual. Some nice supporting actors in your spring garden are the grape hyacinths and the Dutch irises. They're not as showy, but they are worth growing and easy, low maintenance. And two things that you may not consider to be fall bulbs, but this is a great time to plant them, are the Asiatic Lilies and Peonies. Oh, I did want to add one thing. Just because Costco is selling these right now does not mean that you should be planting them right now. You definitely want to wait until the weather cools off. And so I tend to plant mine in November because it has gotten kind of warmer over the years, and September is not the time to plant them. My birthday's at the end of September, and it's always brutally hot on my birthday, and so when people think of September as fall, I'm like, no, October at the earliest, like end of October, November. You can definitely plant all this stuff in December. I don't remember in recent history when the ground has been frozen in December. Even if it snows, if the ground isn't frozen, you can plant this stuff. But for me, I would say November's the perfect time. Now, I wish that Costco was not selling their bulbs in August, but I went ahead and bought them because I don't want to miss out and I don't want them to be all sold by October. So that's why I went ahead and bought them. Last year I kept them in my basement and they did pretty well. I think one variety was a little bit moldy, but I went ahead and planted it and it actually did fine. That's not ideal. I was just trying to decide if I should look into maybe keeping them in the fridge, but fridge space is kind of premium around here. But I kept them in the basement last year and they did pretty well. Definitely don't keep them in your garage. It's going to be way too hot to keep them there. I hope that this video was helpful, and if you go to one of your local stores and just buy some bags of bulbs or bare roots, I think that you will be very happy that you did come next spring and summer. Thanks for watching. See you next time.